This presentation is centered on the martyrdom of the Bab. The Bab was the forerunner, the herald to the advent of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of Baha'i faith. In line with the prophet, founders of the great religions of the world. On May 22nd, 1844, the Bab announced his mission, that of the forerunner herald to the advent of Baha'u'llah. That announcement, that declaration, inaugurated a new phase in history. It set in motion a process that has been since progressing toward a global age. Amidst the background of the intolerant Islamic Shia fundamentalism of Iran, the Bab was put on trial for his claim and was martyred on July 9, 1850. His mangled remains were thrown at the edge of a moat outside the city of Tabriz. The boundless influence of the Bab, his teachings continue to inspire millions across the planet. May this brief account impassion those who are dedicated to the Bab and the Baha'i faith. May it also inspire in others curiosity and passion, such as to look into and investigate the teachings and claims of the Bab and the Baha'i faith. The martyrdom of the Bab. The martyrdom of the Bab took place on July 9, 1850. Baha'i communities in countless localities throughout the world venerate this sacred day. The account of the affliction, agony, and sacrifice of the Bab will be told over and over again over the years and centuries. This brief account is just one attempt to share and impart an inkling of the passion and fervor of the ministry and martyrdom of the Bab. The ministry of the Bab was short, 6 years, from 1844 to 1850. From the declaration of his mission to his first disciple, Mullah Hussein, in 1844, to his martyrdom in Tabriz in 1850. 3 of these 6 years, the Bab was in captivity in the mountains of Azerbaijan, 9 months in Baku, and 2 years and 3 months in the fortress of Chehrib. The guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, in God Passes By, his book, writes these poignant lyrical words. The figure of its master hero, the Bab, arise meteor-like above the horizon of Shiraz, traverse the somber sky of Persia from south to north, decline with tragic swiftness and perish in a blaze of glory in Tabriz. The Bab was in captivity in Azerbaijan during the last years of his life. By the orders of Haji Mirza Aghasi, the Grand Vizier, that is the Prime Minister of Muhammad Shah, and Amir Nizam, the Grand Vizier, the Prime Minister of Nasiruddin Shah. Due to the influence exerted by Haji Mirza Aghasi, the path of the Bab was diverted away from Tehran, where he was to visit face-to-face the sovereign Muhammad Shah. At the village of Kolain, the Bab received a letter from Muhammad Shah, the sovereign, informing him that he will be conducted toward Azerbaijan to Baku, and placed under the custody of Ali Khan Makoui, with the king's instruction to Ali Khan to treat the Bab with utmost respect. The arrival of the Bab in the city of Tabriz, the capital of the province of Azerbaijan, was governed by the crown prince. The arrival of the Bab into the city of Tabriz much excited and stirred up its inhabitants. The crowd gathered to witness his entry into the city. They glorified and cheered him. They cried, Allahu Akbar, that is, God is great. Some invoked the blessings of the Almighty. Others kissed his footsteps. The extent of welcome and level of excitement are reminiscent of the triumphant entry of Jesus Christ into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. In Tabriz, the Bab was imprisoned in this fort called the Citadel, which dominated the whole city. 39 of 40 nights in Tabriz, the Bab was imprisoned in this citadel. He occupied the room high up in the citadel. During the first few days in Tabriz, the Bab had predicted that he would be 9 months in Jabal Basit, that is open mountain Maku, and from there in Jabal Shadid, that is the grievous mountain Chehrik. These mountains are situated on the side of the town of Khoy. From Tabriz, the Bab was conducted to Maku and placed under the custody of Ali Khan Makoui. On this map, here is Tabriz and here is Maku. Maku is situated on one side of the town of Khoy. It is bounded on its west by the river Araxes, which lies between the territory of the sovereign, the Shah, and the Russian Empire. Its residents are all Kurds. In anticipation of this day, 5 centuries before, the poet Hafiz had composed verses in glorification of the river Araxes. Let's take a closer look at Maku. The summit of the mountain of Maku. The mountain forms a concavity. Thus, the overshadowing cliffs obstruct the view of the moon. Some believe that Maku means, where is the moon? Within the concavity lies the fortress of Maku, a solid 4-towered stone edifice that occupies the concavity of this mountain. Fortress of Maku, a large view of the fortress or castle of Maku. During his 9 months of confinement, imprisonment in Maku, the Bab experienced a harsh winter with no heat and dark nights without a single candle. Very soon, the inhabitants of Maku were drawn to the Bab, daily seeking his blessings, a pattern which recurred wherever the Bab stayed. His guard, Ali Khan Makoui, was affected and transformed by the Bab. Thus, the severe restrictions exercised by Ali Khan Makoui changed drastically during the first 2 weeks of the Bab's imprisonment in Maku. One day, Ali Khan had flung himself at the feet of the Bab, pleading delivery from his perplexity. In connection with Maku, I want to share with the viewer, with this audience, that the members of the National Spiritual Assembly of Persia, that is the national Baha'i governing body of Persia, Iran, resolved to go on a pilgrimage to Maku on July 1950, the centenary of the martyrdom of the Bab. The National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran resolved to travel by bus from Tehran for a 9-day pilgrimage in Azerbaijan, Tabriz and Baku. They wished to walk on foot from Mashhad to Baku, the very path taken by Mullah Hussein on foot, almost a century before, to attain the presence of the Bab in the fortress of Baku. As the distance was quite long, they decided to walk from Khoy, taking the mountain pass to the fortress. However, soon they discovered that the road was too steep and the entire mountainous path arduous. Very few were able to make it to the fortress on foot. In order to convey the depth of sentiments evoked by the Bab's captivity in the fortress of Baku, I wish to share a few words from the recorded description of an eyewitness, Zikrullah Khadem, who, along with the other members of the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran, Persia, that is, went on this pilgrimage. The account of 1950 pilgrimage to Baku by Zikrullah Khadem, Hand of the Cause, in the article Pilgrimage to the Scene of the Bab's Captivity and Martyrdom, published in the Baha'i World, a bicentennial international record, 1950 to 1954. Expressions from this account may convey the severity, harshness, and desolation of Baku. Over a wide area around Baku, the plains are black. The world mourns at Baku. For mile on mile, the land is studded with outcroppings of glistening black rock. Like ebony planets, these rocks rise out of the land. They flooded like waves of an ebony sea. Posted haphazardly at the mountain pass are other monstrous shapes, terrifying rock formations that guard the entry. All nature is a prison here. In all the worlds, there is no such terrifying sight as this. Due to relaxation of severe disciplines by Ali Khan Makui, the Bab was transferred by the order of Haj Mirza Aqasi, the Grand Vizier of Muhammad Shah, from Baku to Chehriq, the grievous mountain. Chehriq is situated 20 kilometers to the southwest of Baku. Chehriq, where Bab was consigned to the keeping of Yahya Khan court. Soon Yahya Khan also became deeply affected and transformed by his captive. The inhabitants of that town, the Kurds, continually sought the blessings of the Bab. After 3 months in Chehriq, the Bab was called forth to Tabriz to be examined, to be put on trial. Thus, the Bab was conducted from Chehriq toward Tabriz. As the inhabitants of Khoy had much affection and respect for the Bab, it was deemed inadvisable to go through the town of Khoy, which was on the way. Thus, the Bab was conducted from Chehriq to Tabriz through Urumiyeh, bypassing Khoy. Thus, the Bab was conducted from Chehriq toward Tabriz. As the inhabitants of Khoy had much affection and respect for the Bab, it had been deemed inadvisable to go through the town of Khoy. From Chehriq, the Bab was conducted with utmost respect to Tabriz, taking a path through Urumiyeh. Once again, the Bab entered the city of Tabriz. This time, the Bab encountered wild excitement, the animosity of the ecclesiastical leaders of Azerbaijan. The Bab was to be examined before the convocation of ecclesiastical dignitaries. In compliance with the orders of Haji Mirza Aqqasi, a convocation of the ecclesiastical dignitaries of Tabriz was held in the official residence of the governor of Azerbaijan to try the Bab and determine the means for the execution and extinction of his influence. Meanwhile, a crowd had gathered at the entrance of the hall, impatiently waiting to catch a glimpse of him. The meeting was to be attended by the heir to the throne, Nasruddin Mirza. As soon as the proceedings had begun, the president of that gathering, Nizamul Ulama, in the name of the assembly, commissioned an officer of the army to introduce the Bab to his presence. Upon entry, the Bab greeted the assembly and proceeded directly to seat himself in the seat of the heir to the throne, the only seat which had not been occupied. There was a deep silence. At last, the stillness was broken by the president of that gathering, Nizamul Ulama. Who do you claim to be, and what is the message which you have brought? The Bab responded, at that examination, his trial. The Bab publicly proclaimed his mission. I am the promised one. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked, at whose mention you have risen, whose advent you have longed to witness, and the hour of whose revelation you have prayed God to hasten. Verily, I say, it is incumbent upon the peoples of both the East and the West to obey my word and to pledge allegiance to my person. Contrary to their expectation, this momentous trial provided a forum for the Bab to publicly declare his claim in front of the heir to the throne and the most respected and powerful dignitaries of Azerbaijan. It also served to further inflame the zeal of his followers. The Bab concluded the meeting by arising and leaving that gathering. The audacity shown by the Bab in occupying the seat of the heir to the throne and taking leave without the permission of the chair of that assembly was punished by applying the rod to his feet. The Bab was conducted from Tabriz, now back to Chehriq in the first days of August. Entrusted to the keeping of Yahya Khan Kurd. Shortly after, on September 4, 1848, Muhammad Shah, the reigning monarch, died. Nasruddin Shah, the heir to the throne, succeeded him. Nasruddin Shah's Grand Vizier, Amir Nizam, dispatched orders to Prince Nawab Hamza Mirza, the governor of Azerbaijan, to summon the Bab from Chehriq back to Tabriz. 3 days after the arrival of Bab in Tabriz, the governor of Azerbaijan received an order from Amir Nizam to execute the Bab. Contracted by the flat refusal of the prince, Amir Nizam commissioned his own brother, Mirza Hassan Khan, to execute his orders. Tabriz thus became the arena of martyrdom of the Bab. The Bab was to be transferred immediately to one of the rooms of the barracks of Tabriz, the place designated for his execution. On that day, the city of Tabriz was in turmoil. As the Bab was being led to the courtyard of the barracks, a youth with bare feet and in weary appearance forced his way through the crowd. Breathless, he flung himself at the feet of the Bab. Seizing the hem of his garment, he fervently pleaded, "Send me not from thee, O Master. Wherever thou goest, suffer me to follow thee." Muhammad Ali answered the Bab, "Arise and rest assured that you will be with me. Tomorrow you shall witness what God had decreed." Two other companions, unable to contain themselves, also rushed forward, declaring their love and loyalty. The three were seized and placed in the same cell in which the Bab and his amanuensis, Sayyid Hussein, were confined. That night, the face of the Bab was aglow with joy, indifferent to the storm that raged about him. Early the next morning, the Bab was conducted to the presence of the leading mujtahids, divines of the city, in order to obtain the required authorization for his execution. Authorization that warrants were given instantly on the spot by three high-ranking clergy. Now, with these death warrants in hand, the execution of the Bab could proceed at the designated site, the barracks of Tabriz. Samhan was charged with carrying out the execution. Samhan, the colonel of the Armenian regiment of Urumiyeh, charged to execute the Bab, was hesitant to carry out his order. He made this passionate plea to the Bab: "I profess the Christian faith and entertain no ill will against you. If your cause be the cause of truth, enable me to free myself from the obligation to shed your blood." The Bab replied, "Follow your instructions, and if your intentions be sincere, the Almighty is surely able to relieve you from your perplexity." Samhan ordered his men to drive a nail into the pillar and make fast two ropes to that nail, from which the Bab and his companion were to be separately suspended. Mirza Muhammad Ali, surnamed Anis, who had shown his exemplary obedience and love for the Bab the night before, had been promised by the Bab that he was chosen to share with him the crown of martyrdom. He begged Samhan to be positioned in a manner such that his body would shield that of his master. Thus he was suspended with his head reposed on the breast of the Bab. A spike was driven into the pillar which separated two rooms of the barracks facing the square. Two ropes were fastened to it, from which the Bab and Anis were separately suspended. It was reported that multitudes were crowded on rooftops of the barracks. This painting attempts to render a sense, an illustration of that scene: the barrack square, the leadership of the turban mullahs, the crowd on rooftops, the rage, the fury, the frenzy, and the firing squad arranged in three files, each of 250 men. Each file of the firing squad in turn was ordered to fire. The volley of bullets generated a smoke such that the noonday sun was turned into darkness. When the cloud of smoke had cleared, the multitude witnessed what they could not believe. Before them standing was the companion of the Bab, unhurt, while the Bab himself had vanished. The cord had been severed. "The Sayyid Bab has gone from our sight." They searched for him and found him in the same room which he had occupied the night before, engaged in completing his conversation. "I have finished my conversation with Sayyid Hussein," the Bab told the Farrash Bashi. "Now you may proceed to fulfill your intention." A severe tempest swept over the city of Tabriz at the very moment the shots were fired. A dense whirlwind of dust blinded the eyes and obscured the light of the sun. The entire city remained enveloped in that darkness from noon till night. The Martyrdom of the Bab, July 9, 1850, at noon on Sunday in the city of Tabriz. Using this painting with permission granted by the artist Michael Sowers. The Martyrdom of the Bab, July 9, 1850, in the city of Tabriz, 31 lunar years, 7 months, and 27 days from the day of his birth in Shiraz. Oh, that barrack square. Large crowds had gathered on the rooftops of the barracks as well as the tops of the adjoining buildings to see that martyrdom. Little did they know that they were to witness a momentous event in history. What was the crowd thinking? Some were there to see the face of this enchanter of whom they had heard that anyone going to his presence would be charmed and bewitched, for they had heard that the most erudite had fallen under his charm. They had heard that the renowned emissary of Muhammad Shah had become a Baha'i. And there were many others as well. They had heard that his captors were transformed by him. Who was he? They must have wondered. Some thought that they would finally be rid of this heretic, serves him right, challenging the finality of the religion, preaching continuation of divine revelation, the advent of a new revelation for a new age, and the relativity of religious truth. How dare he challenge the established orthodoxy? And some possibly had no opinion whatsoever. They just wanted to see the spectacle of history, and a spectacle it was. Possibly some must have experienced grief and sadness over the loss of the life of one so young, so comely, so charming, so exquisite, being dispensed with such harsh punishment. They may have even wondered why he continued to persist and insist on his claim. There were Westerners and Orientalists, witnesses to that scene, who then recorded and reported that event, that miracle of history. A thing of such magnitude had to be recorded and reported. The Council of England and the Council of Russia reported this event to their countries. A.L.M. Nicholas writes about it in his book, Sayyid Ali Muhammad Bab, and also Count Gobineau. The Bab's last words will continue to resound throughout time and through generations. Had you believed in me, O wayward generation, every one of you would have followed the example of this youth, who stood in rank above most of you and willingly would have sacrificed himself in my path. The day will come when you will have recognized me. That day I shall have ceased to be with you. The evening of July 9, 1850, the mangled bodies of the Bab and Anis were transferred from the courtyard to the edge of the moat outside the gate of the city. The following morning, the Russian consul in Tabriz visited the spot and ordered an artist who had accompanied him to make a drawing of the remains as they lay beside the moat. Haji Ali Asghar, a devoted believer, upon seeing that drawing, relates. An official of the Russian consulate showed me that same sketch on the very day it was drawn. It was such a faithful portrait of the Bab that I looked upon. No bullet had struck his forehead, his cheeks, or his lips. I gazed upon a smile which seemed to be lingering upon his countenance. His body, however, had been severely mutilated. I could recognize the arms and head of his companion, who seemed to be holding him in his embrace, as I looked horror-struck at that haunting picture and saw how those noble traits had been disfigured. My heart sank within me. I turned away my face in anguish and, regaining my house, locked myself within my room. For 3 days and 3 nights, I could neither sleep nor eat. So overwhelmed was I with emotion. What a short and tumultuous life, with all its sorrows, its turmoils, its banishments, and eventually the awe-inspiring martyrdom with which it had been crowned, seemed again to be reenacted before my eyes. I tossed upon my bed, breathing in agony and pain. The sacred remains of the Bab and Anis were transferred from the moat outside city to Milan. In 1850, under the instruction of Baha'u'llah, they were transported through various sites. And later, instruction in 1868 from Baha'u'llah, from Adrianople, they were transferred. And in 1899, under direction from Abdul Baha, the sacred remains were transferred out of Iran. To summarize, from the moat outside the city to Milan, and on to various sites, numerous sites in Tehran, on to Qom, Kashan, Isfahan, and Kermanshah, and from Kermanshah, they're the order of Abdul Baha, continued on to Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and arriving in Akka on January 31, 1899, and they were interred in the heart of Mount Carmel on March 21, 1909, by the blessed hand of Abdul Baha. The transfer of the sacred remains of the Bab was one of the most outstanding events in the first Baha'i century. One of the most outstanding acts of the ministry of Abdul Baha, one of the most outstanding events in the first Baha'i century. The interment of the sacred remains of the Bab is poignantly described in God Passes By, page 276. When all was finished, and the earthly remains of the martyr prophet of Shiraz were at long last safely deposited for their everlasting rest in the bosom of God's holy mountain, Abdul Baha, who had cast aside his turban, removed his shoes and thrown off his cloak, bent low over the still open sarcophagus, his silver hair waving about his head and his face transfigured and luminous, rested his forehead on the border of the wooden casket, and sobbing aloud, wept with such a weeping that all those who were present wept at him. That night he could not sleep, so overwhelmed was he with emotion. This joyous news was announced to the Baha'i world. The holy The luminous body of the Bab, after having for 60 years been transferred from place to place, has been ceremoniously deposited on the day of Nowruz within the sacred casket in the exalted shrine on Mount Carmel. Thus was fulfilled the prophecy of the prophet Zechariah. Behold, the man whose name is the branch, and he shall grow out of his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. And Zechariah continues several verses down. And they that are far off shall come and build in the temple of the Lord. Thus was fulfilled the prophecy of the prophet Zechariah. Abdul Baha, the man whose name was the branch, interred the sacred remains of the Lord, Rabbi Allah. Those from far away, the Baha'is from throughout the world, participated in building the shrine of the Lord. And now the shrine of the Bab is surrounded by terraces of light upon light, where he had little light in the fortress of Maku. Plaster of Maku is embedded under its tiles. In contrast to the fortress of Maku, where he had no light. Terraces, fortress of Maku, where there was no light. Terraces of light upon light. And from the tablet of visitation of the Bab, the remembrance of God and his praise, and the glory of God and his splendor rest upon thee, O thou who art his beauty. I bear witness that the eye of creation hath never gazed upon one wronged as thee.